Thank you all for joining us. This is Frank McNally from Public Spend Forum. We are going to get started here in just a moment or two, but I wanted to take a minute to do a quick housekeeping. So today's webinar, we will be taking questions, and you can submit those one of two ways, through the webinar chat, which I and my colleague Yanisa will be moderating. And we also have the Q&A function, which is another way to submit questions. You can access both of these features at the bottom of the Zoom player screen. If you hover your mouse at the bottom of your Zoom player, you should see those options come up for the chat and the QA. We will be providing a copy of the slides to all attendees, all registered attendees. So I know that is a popular question, so we will provide the slides. You'll get that in a post-event email that we should be sending tomorrow. I'll definitely be sending tomorrow, so make sure you have the right email entered on your registration. If you don't get the email, just reach out to Yanisa or I, and we can make sure you get those slides. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our host for today, Ash Beatty, to kick us off. Ash?
Great, thank you so much, Frank, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm very happy to be joined here by Rick Grin. I'm Ash Beatty, by the way. I'm a Managing Director at Public Spend Forum. Rick is the Chief Executive Officer of NIGP, the Institute for Public Procurement. Rick, would you like to introduce yourself?
You just did. Thank you. These are very exciting times for public procurement and the way in which we are growing a new workforce with a new generation of professionals. So we at NIGP are just so honored to be part of this conversation and in partnership with Public Spend Forum and all the work that Ash and his team do at the forum.
Great, great. Thank you, Rick. And everyone, I'll just very briefly mention what does Public Spend Forum do? We are a market intelligence and best practices platform for public sector buyers and suppliers. We serve both the buyers and suppliers within public procurement in a few different ways. One, we're a supplier and market knowledge and data platform. Two, we provide best practices, frameworks, standards, and tools. And three, we're a global community, a network of peers and experts in public procurement. You can access all of our resources and tools and market information on the Public Spend Forum website. And more specifically, I'd like to point out that one of our key product areas is GovShop. GovShop is free to public sector buyers. It's a platform for discovering, identifying, researching suppliers and contracts that can be used in a leverageable way by the public sector community. We serve across the public sector, federal, state, and local. And for more information on GovShop, you can find it through the Public Spend Forum website or directly on govshop.com. So what I'd like to do, Rick, is just to get the conversation started on the public procurement workforce competency model, I'll just tee up the few years of background that we have in developing the model itself and our work together with NIGP. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So for everyone's benefit and background and context, we at Public Spend Forum, we began development and work on the public procurement workforce competency model 4 to 5 years ago. We were initially collaborating with the Volker Alliance. And, you know, like our approach in the other best practices areas that we focus on, such as public procurement metrics and procurement technology, we took a similar approach here. And that is that we wanted to engage the community, the public procurement community, very, very broadly, and understand the good thinking that was already out there on this topic of workforce competencies. And so we initially, when we began this effort, we looked really, really broadly at all of the other research that was out there, which covered federal, state, and local in terms of public procurement competencies. We also referenced commercial models, such as what ISM had out there. And for those of you that may not be intimately familiar, that's the Institute of Supply Management, more so private sector focused, but we wanted to leverage the best thinking that was out there. We also engaged broadly, like I mentioned, across the public sector, talking with experts and leaders and practitioners across federal, state, and local. And what we did in the initial instance, the initial version of the model, is we put together a synthesis of the best practices research and the perspectives that very knowledgeable people, certainly more knowledgeable than me, had to offer. So we put it together in version 1 of the model. And since then, we wanted to test that out further, right? So we put that initial version of the model in front of even more people, even more leaders and experts across public procurement, including NIGP. And Rick, I'm really happy to say that over the past 1 year in particular, we've had some fairly extensive collaboration together. And I think NIGP's input has been far-reaching and pretty deep in taking the model into where it is right now. What we're referring to here is version 2.2. And I'll just tee this up briefly. The model is currently being used by NIGP as the basis for developing certifications, credentialing, and training material. And Rick's going to take a deep dive into that as we move forward. Rick, you want to talk about the model itself?
You know, before we do that, just briefly, you know, we've all been, at least on the public service side, and particularly in public procurement, have been deeply concerned about how we prepare the workforce for a number of reasons. The workforce is changing, new generational perceptions of what it means to be in the workforce, how people come prepared or not prepared as they enter public service. This has been a fairly significant issue for us at NIGP because our role really is to develop, support, and promote those who are in public procurement. And so making sure that we have a solid workforce that really understands not only the knowledge, but can apply the knowledge through skills and performance was absolutely critical. That's the job that we need to do in public procurement and as a non-for-profit association. But the issue that I really don't want to leave behind is to have that opportunity, and I see, Ash, that this is part of the attachments that will come your way as you get the presentation, is really to look and see the conclusions offered by the Volker Alliance. Because the Alliance clearly said there is a significant portion of public dollars, of tax dollars, that run through public procurement. And we need to make sure that when those dollars are spent effectively and efficiently, they're done with people that really are professionals that really understand the competencies at stake. I think it's absolutely critical that as part of this discussion, folks take some time to look at the results of the Volker Alliance because it's quite concerning that the amount of money that comes through tax dollars and what we need to do as professional societies, as people that really believe in the value of public service, to really take a hard look at how we have prepared the workforce in the past and how we need to make that transformation into the future.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Rick. And let me advance forward so we can show everyone the most recent version of the model that we're at. Rick, I'll let you speak to the model itself.
Sure. So when Public Spend Forum came to us, you know, as you look at these 7 groups, these focus groups, clearly how we have prepared the workforce in the past has really been focused in to a large degree on groups 3, 4, and 5, on planning analysis, on the sourcing, solicitation, and contract execution. I would say also to some degree in group 2 on policy and legislation and program oversight as a role that public procurement plays. As we looked at the model, though, we felt as though we wanted to expand into additional categories as a result of feedback that we received from the bosses of public procurement. So that particularly in the area of leadership, as the current generations retire, the bosses are looking for the succession plan where young professionals who are passionate about public service and passionate about public procurement can step up into these leadership roles. And they found that as they were trying to recruit or to promote individuals into these leadership categories, these competency skills were missing. the ability to think of innovation, of problem solving, of critical thinking, of relationship management. These are areas that we need to really strengthen in terms of some core competencies in leadership. It's okay to be a great practitioner who knows how to do specifications and knows how to do contract administration. But the area that is most important to us as we move from those procurement techniques are strategies, leadership, and business principles and operations. And therefore, we really wanted to look at an expanded version of the competency model.
Very briefly, Rick, you're going to take a deep dive into all of the learning content, an overview at least of the learning content, the credentialing and certifications in just 1 minute. But I thought I would point out for everyone's benefit, how do you use this competency model? There's many, many different ways of using it, right? We're going to see some pretty exciting stuff coming out from NIGP in just a moment. But I did want to point out that as a starting point, you can take all of those competencies, and I'll just flip back here. You can see there's 33 competencies here across 7 groups. Clearly, the implication is that, well, not everyone's going to be an expert at everything, right? And you're probably already seeing some natural delineation in roles, right? What a contracting officer needs to be good at is probably a little bit different than what a buyer needs to be good at, and so on. You probably have multiple roles within your procurement functions, in most cases at least. And then, of course, the leaders need to be good in other areas as well. And so the first point here is that you can use the competency model to align those individual competencies, these yellow boxes here, sorry to flip back and forth, these yellow boxes here, you can align them with the major roles within your procurement department. So that's the first thing you can do, and you can do it with a fairly specific level of alignment, right? So you can get down into the specifics of what you want your buyers and communicate, of course, what you want your buyers to be good at versus other roles, versus contracting officer, versus maybe procurement specialist or procurement analyst. So you can get down to that level of detail. And obviously, when you're defining your roles based on competencies at the core, as well as other criteria like experience and so on, but when you're getting down to defining your roles based on competencies, you can then set expectations for professionals within public procurement as they progress through their careers and say, I become a more experienced buyer. What level of proficiency do I need to have across these different competencies? Obviously, I can't be good at everything. So the first thing is I'm going to be required to be good at the relevant competencies for a buyer, for example. And then as I become more senior, my level of proficiency will also need to increase. So that's really what bullets 1 and 2 are essentially saying. And if it isn't already obvious, bullet 3 then says, well, you can also use it as job descriptions to be used for recruiting purposes, and then take it forward, right? Take it forward to its natural progression throughout the talent management lifecycle. You can also conduct formal professional evaluations against it, and then set up development programs at the individual level to make sure that an individual's career progress and their expectations around skills and competencies is aligned with that career progression. By the way, as a buyer, if I wanted to switch tracks, for example, and maybe move into the contracting officer track, this would help communicate what additional competencies I then need to begin developing and getting good at, getting experience in on-the-job training, as well as formal training. So this public procurement workforce competency model can be used to serve the entire talent management lifecycle for public procurement professionals. The key thing being, use it to align roles with competencies, recognizing that not everyone needs to be good at everything. So I just wanted to mention that. By the way, as a side comment, Rick mentioned referencing the Volker Alliance report, the initial report, which really does a good job of identifying the impetus or the critical need behind having a competency model, having a robust competency model, which we can apply across the entire profession. So resources such as the Volker Alliance report, the original report from a few years ago, as well as the latest version of the competency model, along with descriptions. Obviously, each of these competencies has descriptions with it, right? So you can get a better idea of what each of these competencies is referring to. And so all of those resources can be found on the Public Spend Forum website, just for sake of context. Rick, any comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, two specific. There's two kind of terminologies that really jump at me in that first bullet. It's dealing with the roles that you currently play in your procurement organization, the roles that you perform or aspire to perform. To your point, this is not a one-size-fits-all. So if I am responsible for contract execution and contract administration after the contract is, now been signed, and now we're under contract to deliver goods and services for a period of time, I really want to focus my learning on that role that I play. And I want to play less of a role less of an educational process in roles that I don't play. And this became one of two aha moments for us at NIGP as we have developed content and educational programs since the 1980s. And that is that rather than trying to put together coursework, a 3-day class, or maybe even an 8-week online class that covered the entire gamut, what we really want to do is be very, very focused on the role that you play in your organization or aspire to play in the future. And the second bullet, which I think is just, it's a very strong statement, is that learning is a journey. You don't learn at the very beginning of your career and then you stop the learning process for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so you expand your understanding, the competencies that you developed when you first came into the profession for the first 2 to 3 years. You now continue that journey, that progress through your career. That's why this competency model, because of its kind of flexibility to identify the competencies, makes this much easier opportunity to develop an educational program and a platform.
Okay, great. Rick, should we talk a little bit about learning pathways?
Yeah, let's move forward on that. So, borrowing from this concept of looking at the roles that you play and the journey that you have in your professional career, what NIGP has introduced is pathways. So it's as the slide suggests, it's competency-based learning, and by competency we're talking not only the knowledge that you need and the ability to apply that knowledge, but we want to go further than that. We want to go into skill development and the ability to perform on the job. And this is a major issue that has been raised by the bosses of procurement, that when they are looking for new talent to bring on the team, or they're looking for a new chief procurement officer, they're looking for the way in which that person performs on the job 24/7. So it's competency-based learning, and it's also credentialing pathways. So credentialing can take many, many forms. It could be, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it could be, credentialing is that whole system of digital badges and certificates and designations and certifications and specializations. They're targeted to be addressed specifically for the needs of the individual. So they're very personalized, they're customized, and at every phase, at every stage of the person's working life in public procurement. So the competencies that you learn right at the very beginning as a buyer one are going to be different competencies that you'll learn as you grow into the position, and now you're a senior buyer, and then you grow further as a manager or the purchasing agent for the organization. And that's why Pathways is so critical, that it really is aligned with every step in that process, and to be recognized through some kind of credentialing methodology for all of that competency learning that you have achieved. So, Asha, if we go to the next slide, then, what are we attempting to accomplish here? One is to create a whole integration, a whole very, very large holistic view of learning, which is that professional development side, and connecting it with the way in you are recognized for your achievements, integrating learning with credentialing. Again, for it to be competency-based, knowledge is great, application of knowledge is great. We want to go further than that. We want to talk about skills, and we want to talk about the performance that makes you most successful in the workplace. And as we talk to our members about what they liked and what they would like to see changed, we've done some different levels of research, but mostly one-on-one conversations with members and with survey documents. They have said to us, we need more choice, more accessibility, more flexibility as you provide us both educational, professional development, and the credentials that go with it, the recognition. The next slide. So again, the idea is about choice so that the individual can, as I say in the slide, have that control to design their own career development path. Not everyone wants to end up being the purchasing agent for their organization. They may decide that they plan on being in public service for the next 3 to 5 years, and they want to move into a whole new career. The data suggests, particularly with millennials, that having 4 or 5 different career changes is not unusual. And so it's having that control over what your career development pathway looks like. And then it really is on that customized learning. It's about, rather than taking a class, a 3-day class where you have to be out of the office and you have to travel to a training site, and on day 3, from 1 to 3 p.m., that's where we actually focused in on the content you needed in order to perform your job. So it's customized learning to identify based on those competencies that we showed earlier, and we'll show you another sample of them, and it looks a little bit differently in terms of a framework, how you can really target in a laser-focused learning based on those roles that you are currently playing and want to attain in the future. And then members have also said, listen, not only do I want to have learning be flexible and customized, but I also want instant recognition. I don't want to wait for 3 to 5 years and maybe go through a certification program. Certification is not of interest to me, but I want to be recognized as immediately as possible once I have achieved those competencies. So, yeah, go ahead. So really, the Pathways has 4 components on it. It really begins with the foundation, which is the Public Procurement Competency Framework. We change the model to framework, but they're essentially the same. You will see that the reason why we're using it as a framework is because it is the structural mechanism we're utilizing to build all of our content, the core competencies. Within the competency framework, we are offering a variety of pathways that professionals can seek. They could seek certificates, or they could seek specializations, or they could seek certification. Again, getting away from the premise that one size fits all, but if I really want to get into a certificate program, I can do that. Or if I just want to get a competency badge, there's a pathway for me as well. So beginning with that Public Procurement Competency Framework on the next slide, Ash, we actually built this a little bit differently, so it's kind of in a wheel now. Again, same 7 focus areas. Within each of these focus areas, there are a number of competencies. Total of 33, as Ash said earlier. And so you would have, for each competency, we will provide a learning module. A learning module would be everything from self-guided online course to, as I said, group assignments, case studies, experiential activities. And not all competencies will be built the same, because some may be 2-hour, 4-hour on-demand course that develops that competency. Others may be a lot more robust because of the learning outcomes that we expect for them. But you can see that the framework is essentially the same. And then with each one of these, you can focus in on the competencies. So let's just take a quick look at those on the next slide. So here's leadership, for example. And again, this is the exact same format that you saw in the yellow diagram before. So again, I am responsible for public procurement. I need to hire a new senior executive leader within my organization. I can look at the competency framework and say, listen, I really think Alice is going to be great in this job. Alice really understands communication. She understands relationship management and how you recruit and develop the best talent. But I think that she could really do good in taking a competency module learning activity on problem solving and critical thinking. So this is where this becomes very customized, because in the past, we would offer a program on leadership development that would have all of these elements in it. But why would you send Alice to a class where she knows all of those elements already? What she needs to do is really strengthen her competencies in problem solving and critical thinking. So again, very, very laser focused, giving flexibility not only to Alice as she moves through her career, but giving a career pathway to Alice's boss, who can now say, if you are an entry-level buyer, I need for you to kind of almost like a menu. I want you to take communication strategies, but there's nothing else in leadership. Yeah, leadership is going to be down the road for people that move from buyer one to a mid-level to a senior buyer, and then maybe into the executive route. So again, you can see how we are able to, and each of these 5 that you're seeing is a learning module that has, again, a composition of reading and videos and group exercises, etc. Let's take another one just for purposes of conversation. So here's strategy, mission, transformation, social responsibility. Each one of these 3, again, is a competency model. And again, I'm fine with transformation and mission and benefit. I really need to strengthen my competencies on social responsibility alignment so I can focus in on that one. Let's take another look at planning analysis. Again, 6 competencies are there. I believe, Ash, on the Volker Alliance, there was some significant concern with the competencies of those who participated in the research on market analysis and forecasting. And so again, if you think about the ability to really focus and customize and personalize this learning process, you can see that you have that opportunity to just go right into market analysis, because I already know about spend and cost, price, and risk analysis. And I think we probably have one more in there on policy and legislation.
Rick, I was just going to comment here to your point that you just made a moment ago. You might recall a little over a year ago, we did a survey, NIGP and Public Spend Forum did a survey of chief procurement officers where we asked for feedback on how well different competencies are currently being exhibited in public procurement, right? How well they feel like their organizations are doing. And to your point, right, Rick, market analysis was one of the leading competencies that chief procurement officers told us needed improvement. In another survey, they also told us it was one of the most important ones to achieve good outcomes. All of these are obviously important on a role-by-role basis, of course, right? But market analysis was called out. So that's yet another reason to be able to take training on each one of these individual competencies within planning analysis. I may be strong in requirements and spend analysis, right? But I may need my training focused on market analysis as just one example. So there's differences in proficiency, if you will, for lack of a better term, which may motivate me as a procurement professional to hone in on individual competencies and not be forced to take, everything within this grouping at the same time.
Right. And so, you know, I don't want to cast aspersions on what we have done at NIGP for years, because I've been part of that process, quite honestly. But what we do, we would build a planning class, and we would cover bits and pieces of all of this. But to your point, Ash, the bosses are saying, I really want my procurement folks to understand market analysis, and they don't. And if that's the case, and because that's what the research showed, we have actually failed in preparing the workforce for these skill sets and competencies they need. And that's why Pathways is so critical, because it does allow you to identify within those 33 competencies which ones are important for the role that you're performing today, the roles that you aspire to play in the future, and then to be recognized by them. So, and I think we had, then this is policy and legislation. Again, 5 competencies that would be available. So again, the idea is about choice, giving the individual, giving the supervisor or manager that opportunity to focus in on the competencies that we believe is important for our job. And then not only is the learning process really important, but it's how that gets integrated into a level of recognition. So if we go just to the next slide, this really ties in with a certificate program. So you will see that certificates actually have a number of ways in which folks get recognized. At that level 1, as you take a competency module and you go through the coursework, and by the way, there's an assessment at the end of it to demonstrate your proficiency in the competency, then you receive a competency badge. It's a digital badge that has portability. A digital badge is very, very common now in, or at least emerging in the educational markets. It's an opportunity for the provider of the digital badge, in this particular case NIGP, to build some metadata into the badge to indicate the learning outcomes and the proficiencies that the individual has as they carry that digital badge. But because it's digital, it's also portable and can be placed on your LinkedIn account, for example, or any kind of social media. So going back to the competency framework and those classes. So Alice wanted to do a critical thinking class. Alice goes through that, she passes the assessment, and now Alice has a competency badge on critical thinking. From level 1, NIGP, through its content management committee, can identify a series, 3 or 4 of those competencies, and stack those competencies into a course certificate. And then we could stack a series of course certificates into a designations. Again, the idea here is to provide the procurement practitioner choice. So they may just want to get 1 or 2 competencies. Other individuals may want to get a core certificate in, for example, strategy. And let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. So this actually shows how these 3 levels work. You get a competency badge on the completion of any competency. We can stack those on the completion of select groupings of competencies to get a core certificate, and those core certificates could be stacked in order to get to a designation. And so just the next slide, and then I know that we want to open it up to some discussion. So we're taking 4 competency badges, and we are stacking or bundling that into a core certificate called Strategy and Policy. Very, very focused on strategy and policy. That is the first of the core certificates that we will make available to anyone in the public procurement profession, and we're launching that as an in-person class in August during our annual conference that's going to be in Austin, Texas. But keep in mind that once that course certificate is offered and strategy and policy, it could be replicated into either in-person class. A lot of our classes are supported through our network of 70 NIGP chapter affiliates, so it could be offered that way. Or you can take each one of those course certificates and do it as an online class. Lots of flexibility, lots of choice. Again, second course certificate, planning and analysis, that one's going to be in mid-fall, and then in late fall, sourcing and contracting. So if you decided, if it was your choice, you wanted to get all three of these course certificates, then you could end up with a designation for a public procurement associate. And then we'll offer that at the end as this course certificate becomes available. Again, the idea is to make sure that individuals have flexibility, customization, accessibility for their learning, whether they want to do it in a classroom or they want to do it online or they want to do it on demand, and to have some flexibility on how they are recognized for achieving those competencies. So this really is the manifestation of the public procurement competency model in the framework of education and learning and recognition.
Great. That's a lot of rich and robust things that NIGP is doing, Rick, in terms of supporting the profession. And I think, you know, this is taking us completely to the next level, if I may say so. Having spent the first 10 to 15 out of my 25 years and working with clients in the private sector, I can tell you that even on an individual company by company basis, this rivals what some of the best companies are doing within the private sector. I don't think anything generally exists even in the private sector in terms of an overarching framework to provide guidance, and certainly not this type of coordinated learning and really disciplined and broken down by competency areas, by individual competencies, and then thought through in terms of, you know, the badges, the certificates, and the designations. So I think this is great. Let me move on to, I think we're going to move on to the question and A. Just as a side comment, if there is interest in a follow-up webinar talking about, okay, so we have these 33 competencies organized by 7 groups. How do we think about aligning them with, you know, the different roles in public procurement? That's obviously going to be a lot more custom to specific organization. You know, it depends on your specific agency's mission, charter, as it pertains to the procurement function, that is. But that's something we're thinking about doing, which we can certainly do. Oops, I didn't mean to go there. Let's open it up to questions. We have a few minutes remaining, I think. Yanisa and Frank.
Hi, we hadn't had any questions come in from the audience, but I really love this topic. Digital badges is something I have been very passionate about. So I'm just curious, maybe if you could speak to like the underlying value of badges as it relates to sort of being able to look at your organization and sort of do an audit of the skills and competencies that you might have, because it does sort of provide that nice visual tapestry that might be easier to account for than, you know, what we have previously been doing, which is certificates at sort of the course-based level. I don't know if you guys had thought much about that in your research.
Was that a question? Was that a question for us at NIGP?
Yeah, well, just curious. Yeah, exactly. Or anybody who feels like they want to take it. Just, you know, the thought being like you could sort of measure competency elements, whether it's you know, policy or it's planning or it's whatever stage of the life cycle. Like we haven't in procurement to date, to my knowledge, had a way to account for all of that, you know, because it's 100-level courses or 300-level courses, but you don't really have the ability to say, I'm really strong in market research and that's kind of how I want to differentiate myself. And so I'm going to go and achieve all of those market research oriented badges.
Right. So some level of assessment before you go on your career path.
Right, and at a more elemental level too, because it's, at least at federal contracting is an example I'll use. There's 3 levels of certification for federal contracting officers.
Right.
Level 1, level 2, level 3, but there's really so much more that people can specialize in, and so badges give people the ability to get credentialed, but also to start to rack up individual competencies and badges in those areas where they're maybe more they have higher acumen.
Well,
maybe not really a question. Much quantification on my end. I apologize.
No.
Yeah, research is a lot more.
No, it's somewhat anecdotal, but it's a collection of conversations we've had with members over the last year as NIGP has been building this. And I think it is to your point. I want to get very, very specific on what I want my team to know at various stages in their careers. We've been working with some larger jurisdictions who are kind of transforming their whole learning environment. And they've sat with us and they've looked at the competency framework and they said, this is excellent. Let me choose from this menu. I want my 1 to 3 year buyers. I want them to know this competency, this competency, and this competency, and let them get really, really good at those. And then I want to move them to the next phase. And it's interesting that not all jurisdictions are alike. So it really depends on, a lot of times, where the talent currently is in that jurisdiction and what the community identifies as the real critical objectives of public procurement. So again, the beauty here is that you can pick and choose. You don't have to, take just one group of courses and become proficient on it.
Right.
So Rick,
another nice thing about the badge framework is they are transferable. You can earn them in an organization and very easily move. They move with you. They belong to you, not necessarily a certification sort of entity.
Right. Yeah, and the reality is that a professional certification also is portable. It belongs to the individual who earns it. But the choice here is that for those who don't see certification as a pathway, because they don't have the years of experience, they don't plan on being in the profession for the period of time that would make them eligible for certification, there is an answer for them in terms of how to be recognized. So Pathways is that integration of learning and recognition and instant recognition, because we also know that people, professionals, value the ability to go to a class, to demonstrate the competency, and then to be recognized for it. And that's where digital badges are really, really nice. Our Chief Content Officer, Todd Slater, I believe is on this call. Todd, do you have any additional insights to share on that with digital badging?
I see that Todd is on the call, but I'm not sure that Todd has audio, so I think he's able to listen to the screen.
Okay.
Hey, Rick, I had a related follow-up question to the topic that you and Frank were just discussing, and you might have already begun to frame up the answer here. If I'm a jurisdiction and let's see, so specific to level 2 on this slide here, get a course certificate upon completion of select groupings of competencies. If as a jurisdiction I wanted to define the groupings differently than what NIGP does offer, how much flexibility do I have in saying, okay, I want to take these 6 competencies instead of these other 5 and define that as a grouping to get a certificate for my professionals?
Right. So that's flexibility that we would certainly consider. At the preliminary stage, we have a content management committee. It's a committee of subject matter experts, practitioners from within the profession, who have looked at the relational connections of the competencies and have kind of packaged them into one to identify the core certificates. But the flexibility of the 33 competencies could very well be that, let's just say the city of Orlando comes to us and says, we're trying to build a learning program for our employees, and we want to, use from this menu of 33 competencies. We want to bundle A, B, C, D, and E, and for that, we want to give them a certificate as a buyer one. Would NIGP be kind of a co-issuer of that certificate? By all means, we would encourage that to happen, because it really isn't about how we have structured education. Pathways is about choice, and it's choice that actually drills down to the public entity that wants to utilize this process to create learning outcomes for their teams.
Excellent. And so, the framework itself and the grouping, say at level 2 groupings, and then even level 3, the designation, sounds like it's recommendations around which competencies stack up to which certificates, and then which certificates stack up to which designations. But there's going to be some flexibility there, because naturally there may be cases where jurisdictions want to add 1 or 2 competencies here and there to achieve a certificate. And likewise, the same applies, I'm assuming, for level 3, the designations.
Right. And so we would work with a jurisdiction to identify what you want to call that certificate. We wouldn't want to replicate it. If when you go out into the marketplace and we got this one on strategy that has 4 competencies built into it, we wouldn't want that to represent different competencies and yet call it the same. But could we go back and work with the city of Orlando in the example, and now they want to issue a certificate for a mid-level buyer, and that mid-level buyer has been defined as having the competencies of X, Y, and Z? That's total flexibility. That's about choice. That's about giving the city of Orlando and its talent a pathway.
Great, fantastic. Frank, just checking in to make sure there's no late-comer questions coming in. Actually, I don't see any. I'm checking myself. I don't see any. We have a shy group today. Typically, we have 5 to 10 questions, and we're hard-pressed to cover them all. Maybe, I don't know, Rick, maybe this is a daunting topic for most folks.
Well, it's I wouldn't say it's overly simplistic, because anytime that you are overlaying multiple options for learning with multiple options for recognition, it can get, I wouldn't say it's as much confusing as I would say complex. And I think the key really is to understand the driver really here is on learning. The driver is not on recognition. I think that that's an area where the member has come to us and says, we'd like to be recognized for what we've been able to achieve in terms of learning. But essentially what we want to do is as we have been calling it at NIGP, we're reimagining what learning looks like. It isn't an instructor sitting in front of a class and lecturing for 3 days. And there's nothing wrong with that. I certainly think that many discussions or many lectures work, but we know how adult learners also want to learn. And so the focus with Pathways is really about taking that framework on the competencies and providing almost a limitless number of options that you could do to help your learning outcomes for today, 5 years, 10 years from now, as it continues to grow. And then to marry those learning outcomes with ways in which to be recognized.
Okay, great, fantastic. Great discussion, by the way, Rick. I'm very excited about Pathways. and the competency framework being deployed in the manner that it is, in the way that NIGP has taken it forward, I think that's fantastic and will be tremendously beneficial for the profession. At this point, Rick, I know you have a hard stop in a few minutes, so since there's no additional questions, Frank, is it all right if we go ahead and conclude?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the time.
Okay, yeah, thank you everybody for attending. I really appreciate your interest in this topic. And Rick, especially to you, thank you so much for leading us through the richness of the pathways learning content that we just went over. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, take care, everybody.